Thought, which appears as form in plant and as soul faculties in animals, appears in human beings in its real form, as thought itself. Animals are soul, human beings are spirit. The spirit being shapes the soul in an animal. In a human being, it descends one step further into the sense-perceptible world of matter itself. In human beings, the form assumed by the formless spirit being is thought, while in plants it assumes the guise of form, and in animals that of soul. The lower beings include all those described by seers as salamanders, sylphs, undines, and gnomes. In fact, they illustrate a spiritual reality that can only be described by using metaphors and images. Beings of this sort help to build up the world, and we encounter them as soon as we enter higher territories that are inaccessible to our physical senses. We encounter the phenomena of the physical world through our outer senses. Similarly, feelings, impulses, instincts, thoughts, and so on become perceptions for our spiritual organs. How these soul and spiritual phenomena become perceptions by means of our inner senses is analogous to how certain processes in space are perceived as colors. One person's thought about another person is not invisible, it is a perceptible process. The actual content of a thought exists only in the mind of the thinker, but it produces effects on the spiritual world, and it is this process that is perceptible to the spiritual eye. The thought is an actual reality, streaming out from one person toward the other. How it affects the other person is experienced as a perceptible process in the spiritual world. Complete inner selflessness is part of this devotion to what the unknown world can reveal. If we want to set out on the path to higher knowledge, we must practice until we are able to obliterate ourselves and all our prejudices at a moment so that something else can flow into us. Only high levels of selfless devotion enable us to perceive the higher spiritual phenomena all around us. We can deliberately cultivate this faculty by trying to refrain from judging people in our surroundings, for example. We must eliminate any standards of attractiveness and unattractiveness, stupidity and cleverness that we apply as a matter of habit. We must try to understand people purely out of themselves. It is best to practice on people to whom we have an active aversion, forcibly suppressing this aversion and letting everything they do work on us without bias. Receptivity is not enough. We must also be capable of properly assessing what we perceive. As long as we still tend to overvalue ourselves at the expense of the world around us, we are putting off the moment when we will glean access to higher knowledge. People who give in to the personal pleasure or pain they experience through things and events in the outer world are still caught up in valuing themselves too highly. And as long as we remain captives of the sense world, we are especially likely to ward off any non-sensory influences. The more we cultivate our ability to refrain from responding immediately to sympathy or antipathy with a judgment or an action, the finer the sensitivity we develop. Even the seemingly most unappealing thing has hidden qualities that are revealed when we do not simply yield to our own selfish feelings. Once we no longer react selfishly to each instance of joy and pain, sympathy and antipathy, we become independent of the changing impressions we receive from the outer world. The pleasure we experience because of a particular thing immediately makes us dependent on that thing. We lose ourselves in it. Once we have learned to accept pleasure and pain with equanimity, we can stop losing ourselves in them and begin to understand them. As soon as I surrender to pleasure, it consumes my very existence. For me, pleasure should be nothing more than an indication that this thing possesses the ability to give pleasure, a characteristic I must learn to recognize in it. If I stop short at the pleasure itself and let myself be totally taken in by it, I am experiencing only myself. We surrender our personal selves so that suffering or pleasure coming from the outside world can work on us. This permits us to develop a totally new way of relating to things. Pleasure and displeasure develop into soul eyes when they cease to assert themselves for their own sake and begin to reveal unknown souls to us. But we must also insert ourselves into the spiritual world of which we all, as thinking beings, are citizens. This can happen in the right way only if, during the process of recognizing the Spirit, we can make our train of thought correspond to the eternal laws of truth. As long as our physical brain is conditioning our cognitive activity, our thoughts appear haphazard and confused. These realms disclose themselves to me only when I approach them with my thinking already strictly disciplined. My thoughts must gradually get out of the habit of running their everyday course and adopt instead the inner character of the spiritual world. I must be able to observe myself in this regard and keep things under control. I must not allow one thought to follow another arbitrarily, but only in accordance with the rigorous standards of the contents of the thought world. The transition from one idea to another must correspond to strict laws of thinking, and I myself as a thinker must stand as a copy of these laws, so to speak. I must eliminate from my train of thought everything not flowing from these laws. Since the strict laws of mathematics are not subject to the ordinary course of sensory phenomena, they make very good preparation for seekers of knowledge, who must put aside personal arbitrariness and distractions. Well-ordered thinking leads them from secure starting points to the most hidden truths. We are acting in harmony with the spiritual world only when its laws are the only ones we obey. Actions proceeding only from our own personality supply no forces that could form a basis for spiritual knowledge. The point here is that instead of presuming to decide on our goals from our own self-serving point of view, we should submit selflessly to the Spirit and allow it to determine our direction for us. Truth itself must become sovereign in us, filling our whole being and transforming us into a replica of the Spirit Country's eternal laws. We must imbue ourselves with these eternal laws. Feelings of pleasure and displeasure or joy and pain will grow into soul organs. When pleasure and pain no longer expend themselves in creating turbulence in our inner life, they begin to function like eyes open to the supersensible world. Whenever I observe a stone, plant, animal, or person, I should be aware that something eternal is expressed there. We must be content with turning our attention to what is lasting. This effort in and of itself will eventually allow us to recognize the eternal. We must wait until this is given to us. Soon after beginning such exercises, people notice major inner transformations. They learn to base their estimation of a thing's importance or lack based exclusively on its recognized relationship to something lasting and eternal. What is transitory no longer attracts them for its own sake, as it used to, but becomes both part of and a metaphor for the eternal. They learn to love the eternal that lives in everything. The spiritually knowledgeable become able to stop obeying only the outer sense world's unpredictable influences that direct their intentions this way and that. Knowledge lets them see into the eternal nature of things. They know that they are no longer simply being impelled by things, but are actively impelling things according to the laws implanted in the things themselves, laws which also become the laws of their own being. This acting from within can only be an ideal to strive for. But the seeker of knowledge must have the will to see the way clearly. This is the will to freedom, because freedom means acting from within, and only those who draw their motivation from the eternal can work from within. Any being who does not do this works out of reasons other than those inherent in things themselves, and thus works contrary to the work of the universe, in a way whose significance can only now become clear. Initiation is bestowed on them through the great spiritual powers guiding the human race. They become disciples of wisdom. Now they converse not with things that have been given form by the Spirit, but with the formative Spirit itself. In moments of spiritual knowledge, their life as personalities exists only to serve as a conscious metaphor of the eternal. They can no longer have any doubts about the Spirit, because doubt is possible only for someone whom things mislead with regard to the Spirit that prevails within them. Imagining the Spirit in a false form is superstition. Freedom from the biases of personality, doubt, and superstition characterize those who have traveled up the path of knowledge to the level of discipleship. This is not what happens in true personality development. Personality as such is maintained on entering into relationship with the spirit world. It is not overcome, but undergoes still higher development.